Vivienne Westwood was once simply a teacher who had an interest in fashion, teaching primary school during the day and at night traveling to Portobello Market to sell jewelry she made herself. She genuinely didn't believe fashion was a lucrative endeavor at this time and had put off a career in it several times before. So how did she go from this to becoming one of the biggest names in fashion ever? Actually, even while she was a teacher, Vivienne craved the more creative life. But fear led her down a path she wasn't happy with, even marrying, having a baby with, and then divorcing her then husband, Derek Westwood, the man that gave her her iconic surname. It actually wasn't until she was introduced to Malcolm McClaren through her brother Gordon Swire that she realized the lifestyle that she had craved so much was actually viable. She divorced her husband in 1965 and began dating Malcolm. Vivienne was making clothes for herself and for Malcolm McClaren as she had done since she was a teenager, and clearly they were exceptionally fashionable because as Malcolm passed by a newly opened shop called Paradise Garage in 1971, the shop manager, Bradley Mendelsohn, was so impressed with Malcolm's style and charm that he offered Malcolm and his friend Patrick Casey the back of the shop for their own retail space. The shop was influential in itself already too, with the owner, Trevor Miles, being the first man to import and sell deadstock denim into Britain under the belief that there is already too much fabric and clothing in the world, so we should use up what we have, a mentality that has stuck with Vivienne even to this day. The half shop was named Let It Rock in Paradise Garage. Inspired by the teddy boy alternative style that came from 50s retromania, they brought in Vivienne to design the clothes for the store. This was so successful, in fact, that they soon managed to buy the entire store from the shop owner and were regularly selling out of clothes faster than Vivienne and her tailoring friends could make them. This is truly the beginning of her design career, as she was effectively given carte blanche to design what she wanted and gifted a store in which to sell it. This is the kind of opportunity afforded to very few, mostly people from super rich families like Stella McCartney, Fenty from Rihanna, or Victoria Beckham. But these pushes can be fundamental in growing a business, hence why so few designers like Vivienne from a working class background can truly make it in the fashion industry. But Vivienne was smart. She had a niche market to whom she truly understood and therefore could sell to with ease, so she began mostly with graphic t-shirts she knew would sell with explicit imagery, many of which focused on adult imagery, as well as lèse-majesté prints, which were bound to catch the attention of the young and rebellious Londoners who were still rebelling over the police harassment and economic hardships that had come to define Britain in the 60s. Within a fairly short amount of time, the work she was doing as a designer was sufficiently profitable at Let It Rock, and so she was able to quit her job as a teacher. She expanded her product line to include jackets, dresses, trousers, and shoes that were also incredibly successful within her niche subculture. However, she was perturbed by the teddy boys' growingly racist and sexist remarks, and she no longer wanted to encourage their behavior. The shop was therefore rebranded in 1973 to Too Fast to Live, Too Young to Die, as a reference to James Dean's untimely death. Too Fast to Live, Too Young to Die was a bit of a long name, so it was quickly changed. But even though it was shortly lived, the skull insignia has become another brand identifier, as well as the slogan as a whole, which has been printed on many garments through the years and means a great deal to Vivienne, probably because unlike Let It Rock, she chose the name. But like I said, it was shortly lived, and less than a year later, in 1974, they rebranded again to Sex, all caps. The name of the shop is genius. It's punchy, short, easy to remember, but mostly heavily ties the punk aesthetic that is fundamental to the Vivienne Westwood brand to the shop. The store name was obviously divisive and was heavily talked about in London because it was considered fresh to some and vulgar to others. Vivienne understood early on that to have a successful brand you needed publicity, and this was the perfect way to do it. This extended to the garments of the shop that she was producing at the time, which continued to sell the extreme graphic prints over t-shirts, trousers, dresses, etc., but now included more elements to the Vivienne Westwood brand like ripped fabrics, distressing, and exposed stitching. The look was exactly the push the shop needed to put off the teddy boys that Vivienne and Malcolm had grown tired of and to cultivate their own following of punks dedicated to the store. Branding that was so successful, in fact, that it made the shop one of the most successful retail stores in the whole of England, and even produced a band that had even wider appeal, the Sex Pistols. The Sex Pistols were a huge group at the time, made up of the customers and workers of the store, managed by Malcolm McClaren and dressed by Vivienne Westwood. Obviously, their influence on the music scene in London is legendary, but in terms of the growth of Vivienne's business, they were also revolutionary. The band literally having the name of the shop in their name, as well as wearing custom clothing for every performance, skyrocketed the brand to new heights of worldwide fame, despite the foolish choice to change the store name to Seditionaries Clothes for Heroes just as the band was getting popular. Of course, celebrity endorsement of a brand has been common in the fashion industry, even dating back to personal designers of kings and queens, like Marie Antoinette's designer, Rose Bertin. But I believe this was the first time a band was so heavily tied to a fashion label, instead of choosing a muse, which was much more common at the time, like Audrey Hepburn for Givenchy or Rita Hayworth for Dior. This marketing was revolutionary, and is still yet to be recreated by another brand or designer to my knowledge, although Vivienne has tried it with other bands much less successfully. Vivienne has said that this was the first time she felt like a real designer, but unfortunately this high would not last long. The band disbanded in 1978, and though she herself was not yet known by name as a designer, she knew she had what it took to be an incredibly influential figure going forwards. This is when, in 1980, she and Malcolm decided to rebrand once again, this time with a focus on her as a designer, though definitely still a partnership. They renamed the shop to At World's End, a name that has stuck even to this day, and began pushing for Vivienne as a designer to be respected in the industry. The first step was to present her first true collection at London Fashion Week for Autumn-Winter 1981, named Pirates. A collection that was enormously successful in pushing the new romantic look in the early 80s, which you'll know from Adam Ant, who once worked at her store, and Boy George of Culture Club. The collection was a departure from what was being done with her brand so far, this time introducing much more colourful designs, as well as the squiggle print that has also become a mainstay of her brand today. Actually, this was a departure from anything the fashion world had ever seen. Not only was it the first to showcase clothing that was made to shock in this kind of a way, it was also the first collection ever to take exact historic garments and reconstruct them for the modern day. A tactic that nearly all designer labels seem to implement these days. Actually, a lot of this collection is still sold today, from these shoes that were once called bondage shoes, now called pirate shoes, to the aforementioned print, to the focus on historical silhouettes. This show really exploded the London fashion world at the time because of how groundbreaking it was. She was the first designer to show a punk aesthetic on the catwalk, yes, but most importantly, this was the first collection ever to have such a unique and solid theming that has been compared to literally sending a West End cast of a pirate musical down the catwalk. This show was a smash hit, and several shows followed with their own themings. But something I find so endearing about watching back these old shows is just how much fun the models were having. They knew this was their time to play and have a good time on the catwalk, really making it look like such a fun experience to be at. This idea of basically throwing a party on the stage ended up being a staple of 80s catwalk shows, with multiple designers trying to infuse that spirit for life into their own brands. So Vivienne's line was getting a ton of attention. They were creatively and somewhat financially successful too, opening a second boutique called Nostalgia of Mud. However, with all this success, a wedge had grown between Malcolm and Vivienne. It seems like Malcolm was rather jealous and unkind at the time, calling Vivienne only a seamstress and outright telling her that she would be nowhere without him. Obviously, this led to them parting ways, but this happened during the time the Autumn-Winter 83 collection Witches was about to be shown. It was technically their last collection as a pair, after which everything transferred over to Vivienne. She kept the store and the store name, but tweaked the brand once again to her own line under her own name, Vivienne Westwood. Very shortly after this cutting of ties with Malcolm is when Vivienne would see the true catalyst for her brand becoming the behemoth that it is today. As the Autumn-Winter 83 collection was coming into stores, one of the Keith Haring collab pieces from the collection was photographed on a young Madonna and used in the music video for her song Borderline for the promotion of her first album that was self-titled. Technically, Madonna's album was not an immediate hit. It only debuted at number 190 on the Billboard charts, though it has gone on to be triple platinum. But the promotional material featuring this skirt was a breakthrough for Vivienne. She was already well known in the fashion industry by this point, but it was this skirt that pushed her into a household name, and it single-handedly saw product sales soar. Surprisingly though, it was at this time she closed her Nostalgia of Mud shop to move to Italy and showed her first totally solo collection in Spring-Summer '84 in Tokyo for the Global Fashion Awards. So, from Spring-Summer '84 to Spring-Summer '87, Vivienne Westwood continued her punk aesthetic in her collections, building on the brand elements that we know, like the pirate boots, squiggle print, historical silhouettes, and provocative prints. But for her Autumn-Winter '87 collection, she added one more. This symbol, that we now know as her logo, was originally a collaboration motif for her work with the Harris Tweed Authority, with whom she produced the Autumn-Winter '87 collection, inspired not only by the fabric, but Scotland in general, which is where Harris Tweed is officially made. But due to the extreme success of the collection specifically, not only did she keep the logo even to this day, she also single-handedly saved the Harris Tweed industry in Scotland from dying out, and she still produces many of her woolen looks, including suiting with them today. Vivienne Westwood had a huge swing in the industry at this point, reopening the Nostalgia of Mud shop, opening another store on Davy Street, and now having a full-time team behind her. But that doesn't mean she was really respected by the fashion industry. It's actually in this Vogue interview with Naomi Campbell that Vivienne tells the story of her British Designer of the Year award in 1990. She recalls the panel refusing to give the accolade to her year after year until they had given it to literally every other possible designer at her level, and they were trying to give it to those designers a second time, when the other designers banded together to refuse the award until Vivienne had one for herself. They acquiesced to her win in 1990, only then to give her a second in 1991, and then to see her receive an OBE in 1992, in a ceremony that she infamously went commando to, something that Queen Elizabeth apparently found really amusing, despite the media at the time saying how disrespectful it was to the Queen. The irony that London is now known for championing punk designers yet vehemently trying to suppress them for 30 years is not lost on anyone. Vivienne Westwood arguably has had the biggest influence on British design than any other in modern history, and it took her forcing her way into the then very closed-off industry to change it all. The 1990s saw incredible growth for the brand. She opened her first store in Japan that fundamentally changed Japanese fashion. She introduced a wedding dress line in 1992, a menswear line in 1996, debuted a fragrance line, and launched Anglomania as a diffusion line in 1998. She opened a store in New York and debuted a ready-to-wear line, Vivienne Westwood Red, in 1999. She had product mega hits like the pearl necklace and the corset, which are still bestsellers for the brand, but the growth was most notably due to the rise of these supermodels. Vivienne Westwood by this time had the influence to have the big-name models at her show, and despite being quite poor at the time, poor enough that she couldn't pay the models much at all, she had such a good relationship with all of them that they all wanted to walk her show, despite how little she was able to pay them. And it's a good job they did, because some of the most iconic supermodel moments of the 90s happened on Vivienne's catwalks. From Kate eating an ice cream while topless, to the iconic fall of Naomi Campbell in Autumn-Winter '93, which she says in this interview with Vivienne that many other top designers at the time asked her to recreate, specifically because of the sheer amount of press it garnered Vivienne's brand. Naomi obviously refused as a very proud individual, and has stated that it would never have happened if not for the rubber tights she was wearing at the time, proving as such in her second look of the show, in which she was given a cane that she refused to use. The collection, Anglomania, luckily was composed of developments of her best hits. Elements from the Sex, Pirate, Mini Crinny, and Bondage collections were all displayed through the Scottish lens, for which she had designed both her own tartan and clan, the MacAndreas, named after her new husband, Andreas Kronthaler, the Mac, of course, standing for Child of in Gaelic. Andreas Kronthaler is a huge influence on her brand, and even has his own demi-couture collection called Andreas Kronthaler for Vivienne Westwood, formerly known as Vivienne Westwood Gold. However, for the sake of this video's length, we have to kind of skip over him slightly to talk about the 2000s. Throughout her entire career, Vivienne Westwood has been about activism. It has always been a part of her brand, but now she decided to use the platform she has built for herself to directly tackle as many issues as she can, physically getting out to protest and marches for a wide variety of causes, though mostly on environmental issues and human rights issues. She used her position as a celebrity to bring awareness to causes that she cares so deeply about, unwaveringly risking her reputation and career in the process, sometimes even actively trying to get people to stop buying merchandise with her now iconic slogan, "Buy less, buy well," something that very few people are willing to do. Vivienne never cared about how risky it was or what might become of her brand. Actively affecting the issues that she cared about was far more important to her than any of it, and so she has raised hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pounds for charities and causes all across the world, all while continuing to design iconic collections like the Comme des Garçons collaboration for Autumn/Winter 02 and having her own solo exhibition in the V&A Gallery in 2004, which was the first of its kind for this historic museum, and then even gaining herself a damehood in the process. I really respect Dame Vivienne Westwood as a designer, and I think the world is a much better place with her in it. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to see next week's video on Sakai, or check out JW Anderson, Kid Super, or Christopher Shannon now.